Welcome, Dr. Zais.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I have to put on my glasses because it makes me look smarter. And Phil and I were partners in the school choice movement in South Carolina when he was a member of the House of Representatives, and hopefully we have more voices in the South Carolina House and Senate than we had in those days, but it's a continuing fight. It's great to be back in South Carolina after the craziness of Washington that we experience every day, and to see so many friendly faces, and to be back in my beautiful home state and my beautiful home city of Columbia, South Carolina. I'm here to speak with you today about education in America, where we've been, where we are now, where we can go, and how we can get there. First, I'm going to tell you the truth about American education. I'll describe a number of factors that contribute to our current situation, and I'll describe what's to blame and who's not to blame for the current situation. Finally, I'll outline a bold, transformative plan that will lead to significant improvements in our American educational system. The truth is, American education today is not working for too many students. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, which many of you know as the nation's report card, reports that 2/3 of fourth graders basically read below grade level, and 1/3 of them can't read. We have similarly bad results for our eighth graders who are tested. In math, only 1/3 of them are proficient, which means that 2/3 are not ready for high school math. And 2/3 of all of American eighth graders are not proficient in any of the tested core subjects. That's the national results. Internationally, there's something called the PISA, the Program for International Assessment of Students. Since it was first administered in 2000, overall rankings for American students have declined precipitously. Our students now rank 24th in the world in reading comprehension. This is our 15-year-old students. 25th in the world in their understanding of science, and 40th in the world in their knowledge of mathematics, behind Russia and Malta. Other countries ahead of us are Estonia, Slovenia. We're not talking about major industrialized countries that outperform our 15-year-olds. The Office of Economic Cooperation and Development has done similar studies of young adults in America. The U.S. ranks 21st out of 29 countries in adult literacy. And U.S. adults were ranked last of 29 in problem solving in a technology-rich environment. You all know what the ACT College Readiness Exam is. It's administered to high school students nationwide, and it does what it purports to do, measure readiness for college-level work. Readiness is defined as a 75% chance of getting a C or better in the commensurate college course. And given the level of grade inflation in our colleges and universities, C is not a very high bar. Sadly, only 26% of test takers, who are typically our most successful students, are deemed ready for college in the 4 subjects tested: English, reading, math, and science. In large measure, this low level of college readiness accounts for the fact that 45% of students who enroll in college either drop out or have not graduated after 6 years. Fact is, the United States once had one of the highest, if not the highest, graduation rate from college of any country in the world. We're now ranked 22nd out of 27 industrialized nations. Is it any wonder that the World Economic Council ranked American education 26th overall and 55th for the quality of our math and science programs? Now, compare that to when the United States finished 4th in the Winter Olympics and the American people were incensed. But we're 40th in our students' mastery of mathematics, and what happens? Well, here's what happens. Affluent families put their kids in private schools. Middle-income families move to the suburbs and the highly ranked school districts. And America's forgotten students languish in perennially underperforming and failing schools with no escape and no power to do anything about it. One of the recurring themes that we hear from the education establishment is that to fix education in America, we just need more money. But the data show otherwise. During the 50-year period from 1965 to 2015, after controlling for inflation, per capita or per student funding increased over 300%, actually 318% to be precise. And this is 6% per year after controlling for inflation addition, 6% in addition to inflation. So it's not a lack of money. As Secretary DeVos has pointed out, and I'm quoting from her, American taxpayers spend on average about $13,000 per student per year. With an average class size of 21 students, that adds up to $273,000 per classroom. Nationwide, we know that the average classroom teacher makes about $60,000 annually. So where does that other $213,000 per classroom per year go? Well, here's the dirty little secret. It goes to highly paid administrators, coordinators, consultants, assistant principals, assistant superintendents, curriculum coordinators, layers and layers of bureaucracy. Since 1950, the number of non-instructional staff, that's people who work in our schools who are not teachers, has increased 7 times faster than the number of students in our schools has increased. Now, while businesses nationwide have substituted capital for labor, this is true in banking, farming, manufacturing, insurance, even in medicine, only one industry has remained impervious to this revolution: the education industry. And let's not kid ourselves. Education as an industry is based by all of those booths that were out there. In fact, it's a $700 billion a year industry. So what do we have to show for all of this spending and all of this administrative hiring? Higher test scores? No, they're pretty much flat. Higher international rankings? No, they've been falling steadily. What we do have to show is a huge bill to the taxpayers and an exploding educational bureaucracy. The numbers convincingly demonstrate that American education does not need more money or more staff, but the forces of the status quo continue to insist otherwise. But as President Reagan famously quipped, status quo is just Latin for the mess we're in. Even former Secretary of Education during President Obama's administration admonished, and I quote from Secretary DeVos's predecessor, "The only way you can improve education system is to tell the truth. Sometimes that's a brutal, ugly truth," end quote. And the truth is American education is in a mess. And this is not just bad news for students, it's bad news for the nation. In 2012, the Council on Foreign Relations commissioned a report co-chaired by Joel Klein, who was the Commissioner of Education in New York City, and Condoleezza Rice, who, as you know, was our Secretary of State and Dean at Stanford. The Klein-Rice report concluded that education is characterized by, and I'm quoting here, a sclerotic bureaucracy, lack of incentive for innovation, and few awards for excellent teaching. The study notes too many young people are not employable in an increasingly high-skilled and global economy, and too many are not qualified to join the military because they're physically unfit, have criminal records, or an inadequate level of education. Klein and Rice concluded, educational failure puts the United States' future economic prosperity, global position, and physical safety at risk. Now, these failures of the American education system are not a new phenomenon. Those of you of a certain age may recall that in 1981, the Reagan administration created the National Commission on Excellence in Education. The title of the Commission's final report clearly summarizes their findings. It was called A Nation at Risk. The report that found that the United States has one of the shortest school days and one of the shortest school years of any country on the planet. It also reported that for the first time, the educational skills of one generation will not surpass, will not equal, will not even approach those of their parents. Ultimately, the report concluded, and I quote, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war, end quote. Al Shanker, some of you may remember, was the former president of the American Federation of Teachers. I like to quote people who might be assumed to be having different views than I do. But in a speech before the National Press Club in 1988, Shanker said, 80% of students do not learn well in traditional settings. What we're doing now only seems to work for the 20% of students who are able to sit still, who are able to keep quiet, who are able to remember after they listen to somebody else talk for 5 hours, and who are able to pick up a book and learn from it. He said, suppose you went to a doctor and the doctor prescribed a certain medication for you. After a few days, you go back to the doctor and say, Doc, this pill not only didn't help me, but look at these other bad things that are happening to me since I started taking it. If the doctor were our school system, he would look at you and say, you've got a hell of a lot of nerve not responding to my pill. What's wrong with you? In the 37 years since the Commission's report and the 31 years since Al Shanker's speech before the National Press Club, things have changed. They've gotten worse. We're still a nation at risk. In fact, we're a nation at greater risk. Lowell Milken, some of you may know, is the chairman and founder of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. He wrote, the effectiveness of an educational system cannot exceed the effectiveness of the educators in the system. In education, human capital is far more important than financial capital. He's right. Teacher effectiveness is the single most important school-related factor in student learning outcomes, including class size and per pupil funding. In fact, teachers have 3 times as much influence on student learning outcomes as the school that they're teaching in. Yet parents have no information about the influence of no information or influence over what teachers their children have. A 3-year study conducted at Harvard by Thomas Klein, a professor of education and economics, found that a bad teacher is measured by student learning gains, not achievement, gains, could set a student's educational progress back by as much as 9 months. However, barring a felony, it's extremely difficult to remove an ineffective teacher. Tenure, sometimes granted after as little as 2 years, tends to protect the least competent teachers at the effective students and their more effective peers. The Harvard study tracked the performance of 2.5 million students over 2 decades. It found that replacing an ineffective teacher, that's one in the bottom 20 percentile, with a good or above average teacher could produce huge gains for students. And students with highly effective teachers not only earn significantly more for the rest of their lifetime, they're likely to do better on a number of outcomes that measure life success. Research on the effects of principals, and I hope we've got some principals here to demonstrate that, like teachers, principals have a profound impact on student learning outcomes. The most effective principals, those in the top 20%, will raise student learning outcomes by 15 percentile points. The principals in the bottom 20% will lower student learning outcomes by 15 percentile points. This 30 percentile gap between the best and the worst principals means the difference between graduating from high school or not, between going to college or not. And while teachers and principals have the largest impact on student performance, their salaries are unrelated to their success, with predictably dysfunctional results. As a college president for 10 years, I can assure you that our professors were compensated in large measure based on the disciplines they teach. Our math, science, engineering, and business professors were paid significantly more than our English, history, sociology, and psychology professors. And raises were based on performance, not based on seniority. Currently, we dramatically underpay our best teachers and our best principals, while union bosses are earning in excess of $500,000 a year. We see those union bosses in Washington a lot. Sadly, the increase in per pupil spending has had little effect on teacher compensation. The surge in non-teaching staff has absorbed the influx of dollars. One study noted that if the ratio of non-teaching staff to student enrollment had remained at 1992 levels, the money saved could have provided teachers with an additional $11,000 a year in additional compensation. Now, I come from a family of teachers. My mother was teaching home economics and my dad was a PE teacher and coach when they met. My mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and daughter-in-law are all career elementary school teachers. My wife and my daughter both worked as adult education teachers and English as a second language teacher. My brother and I were both professors at a public college. I have the highest regard for educators and the nobility of the profession. The problem is not the people. The problem is a one-size-fits-all, top-down, bureaucratically encumbered system that limits the authority and the freedom of the people in the system. Another contributing to the factor of American education is the myriad of elected officials and agencies that stifle initiative and creativity. They are the source of well-meaning statutes, regulations, policies, and proscriptions, which do produce compliance, but tie the hands of imaginative teachers, innovative principals, and entrepreneurial superintendents, and also stifling initiative and suppressing creativity. The system is characterized by a fragmented approach to leadership and decision making. There are too many cooks in the education kitchen. For example, school principals. Let me see the hands of principals. Well, since you're all from charter schools, much of this doesn't apply to you. But a typical school principal has no control over her workforce. Generally, she can neither hire nor fire teachers nor staff because human resources decisions are above her pay grade. Now, district offices are led by highly paid superintendents. As an aside, as state superintendent of education, I was the lowest paid superintendent in the state. I'm not complaining about that. When I ran for office, I knew what the salary was. My point is that superintendents make a lot of money, even superintendents who have as few as fewer than 1,000 students in their district. Anyway, we've got these high-paid superintendents, assistant superintendents. They're responsible for human relations, clerical, logistic, and academic aspects of the school. That is, the regular suspects: food service, transportation, contracting, legal work, budgeting, finance, payroll, and curriculum. School districts are governed by a maze of complex federal statutes and state policies, and they're encumbered with very complicated budgeting and accounting requirements that limit all the different pots of money and prohibit you from moving money to the area of greatest need. Now, these districts are governed by school boards, and in theory, these school boards establish broad policies that reflect the priorities of the local communities. But in practice, school boards are usually focused on the operational aspects of the schools, not the policies, and working to raise more money for the school system. The fact is, most school boards are a net expense with, at best, little value added. Despite America's love of and desire for local control, what we have is the worst of both worlds. On the one hand, district administrators and school boards limit the authority and initiative of principals through standardization, bureaucracy, and one-size-fits-all solutions. Principals have little control over their budgets, their staff, and their curriculum, and consequently they're prohibited in too many instances from doing what's in the best interest of their students. On the other hand, reform-minded school boards and superintendents are not strong enough to overcome the obstacles placed in their path by state and federal governments. And as I mentioned, charter schools are exempted from many of these dysfunctional regulations and policies, and our public charter school students outperform their peers. Is it any wonder that over 1 million families in America are on the wait list to get into our public charter schools? But the fact is, despite their enormous success, opponents of education freedom have stepped up their attacks on public charter schools, from Denver to DC, from Detroit to Los Angeles. For example, in New York State, the highest scores in the state on student achievement measures came from a district in inner city New York, the 45 Success Academy public charter schools. Proficiency rates for these mostly low-income Hispanic and African American students were an astonishing 90% for English and 99% for math. Yet Mayor de Blasio is working to restrict the growth of public charter schools in New York City just to gain the support and the campaign contributions from the teachers' unions, all of which oppose any form of educational freedom, even public school choice. Interestingly and ironically, Many of our early childhood and pre-K schools, as well as our higher education system, are based on freedom. In many states, dollars for pre-K go to the child, and the parent can enroll the child in the pre-K provider, either public or private, of the parent's choice. Likewise, at the national level, all federal student aid and grants goes to the student, and in most cases, state scholarships and grants go to the student, who can then enroll in a large public research university, a small private teaching college, a school that is faith-based, a school that focuses on a specific program such as theology or engineering or technology. The point is, at the pre-K and the college level, we fund the student, who then takes the money. It's only in the K-12 world where those who suggest that we should fund school students rather than the school system are vilified as, quote, out to destroy public education and to divert public dollars to private providers. Now, I can take my Medicare dollars to a private provider if I want to. Why can't students take their education dollars to a private provider? Now, given the dismal outcomes from the current and antiquated approach to education in America, is it any surprise that according to the most recent Gallup poll, Americans' confidence in their public education system is at an all-time low? Only 20% of respondents had a lot or a great deal of confidence in them. And it marks a steady decline since 1973, when Gallup first started asking about our public schools. What's the bottom line? The education system in America does not need to be reformed. It needs to be transformed. Secretary DeVos is leading the effort to transform education in America. And to transform education in America, students, parents, and teachers need education freedom. Secretary DeVos believes students should be free to learn in ways and in places that work for them. She understands that parents, not government bureaucrats, can best assess the needs, skills, and aspirations of their children. And Secretary DeVos recognizes that while every child is unique, every child is special. And that's why this administration proposes something called Education Freedom Scholarships. This bold proposal is a federal tax credit. And to explain what that means is, instead of sending all of your taxes to the U.S. Treasury, you would have the ability to send much of your taxes to a scholarship granting organization here in South Carolina. We already have those scholarship granting organizations here, who then could decide how to disperse those dollars. We're looking at $5 billion a year. We have about 70 congressmen in the U.S. Congress as co-sponsors. I don't know how many senators we got. Ted Cruz is the lead sponsor in the U.S. Senate. Here are some of the things that those scholarship dollars could be used for. They could be used for apprenticeships, dual enrollment, industry certifications. They could be used to cover transportation to a different public school or a charter school. Scholarships could be used for educational therapies for special needs students, or tuition for a job training plan or program, something like a coding boot camp. They could be used for industry certifications and examinations, or for tuition at a private school. Florida has a large similar scholarship program that enables low-income students to escape failing schools and enroll in private schools. Our proposal will not expand the federal government. Both the Secretary and I have been outspoken critics of the heavy hand of federal government in state education. because these programs will be managed at the state level. States can choose to participate or not. Parents can choose to participate or not. It's all voluntary. In the end, we will never fix what's wrong with education in America until we stop funding the system and start funding students. Now, people who care about our youth and the future of our country, and that includes all the people in this room, must work to transform American education by restoring freedom. This includes teachers, and importantly, it includes students and parents. So I would ask all of us to pledge to work together to provide the options and independence that education freedom demands. Let's all be activists. Let's agitate for the interest of children, not union bosses. Let's be vocal supporters for all forms of education, including our traditional education system, and including our public charter schools. In other words, give me freedom, give me liberty, give me school choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zais. I know you will allow a few questions, but I know that my board chair has the first one kind of kicking it off.
Doctor, thanks for your remarks.